Firstly, I'd like to thank some of the sponsors we have for this event. Golden Artist Colors have been very generous, and I don't know if any of you have done any research on their website, but they do a really great job of putting information out there for artists. There's lots of tutorials, videos, articles. We actually have some newsletters in the back of their Just Paint newsletter if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. Of course, as I mentioned, Arts at the Armory. The Armory was very generous to let us use the space tonight. The Somerville Arts Council offered me great consulting. I've never planned an event like this before, and they helped me to get the word out. And then I also need to thank Jessa DeMora from Funnel Cake Marketing. She's very connected in the art scene, and she definitely got the word out to everyone. I'm really grateful for that. So I should introduce myself. My name is Melissa King. I'm a professional pet portrait artist. I work in Somerville. I have a studio at Joy Street Studios. I've been working professionally as an artist for 6 years. I'm also pursuing a career in art conservation, and I have about 7 years of experience. They call it pre-program experience before you get into a graduate program. And I just found out last Friday that I was accepted into graduate school, so I will be starting this summer at the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation. So art conservation is a very highly specialized career. In order to be an art conservator, you need to have training in chemistry, studio art, and art history. As conservators, we learn to identify materials and understand how they age, and as well as how they interact with the environment. So, I thought I would share this. If you can see, this is some example of my artwork. I go by Pablo Picasso, and I paint pet portraits. And on the bottom image, you'll see there's a mural that I painted. I apologize for the quality. But for this mural, I actually called Golden Paints. There's a number you can find on their website. And talked to a material scientist and discussed with them some of the concerns I had about painting a mural in a doggy daycare. And they gave me a good solution for varnishing it and the proper way to preserve the mural. The image on the right is an image that I posted on my Instagram account. So as I mentioned, as a conservator and as an artist, I've become extremely interested in doing whatever I can as an artist to make my artwork last. So I've worked with many conservators, and I've spoken to a lot of them, and I have started to include backing board on the back of all of my paintings. It provides structural support, but it also does a good job of preventing dirt and dust and anything from collecting from behind the painting. And I've also started, it's hard to see in this photo, but I've attached care instructions specifically for my type of painting. That's, in hopes that my customers, once they take their paintings away, will have a better understanding of how to keep their painting clean and preserve it. So this is my Instagram account. I have used this Instagram as a platform to reach out to customers and I suppose other artists, anyone that might follow me. And I've actually been using it as a marketing tool to show my customers, like, look, I really care about the preservation of my artwork. I really want to make sure that these paintings that you pay me like a decent amount of money for will last. So I really truly believe that it adds a lot of value to your artwork to really consider these things and to let people know that you're considering these things. So enough about me. I would like to introduce the panel. Over here on the left is Rika Smith McNally. She is a graduate of the Rhode Island, oh yeah, you can clap if you'd like. She is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, has an MS in Art Conservation from the Winterthur University of Delaware Art Conservation Program, and a certificate in conservation from Harvard University Art Museums. Her published research includes a study of protective coatings on outdoor bronzes, the inherent causes of deterioration in 15th century French Limoges enamels, the materials and techniques of the Harvard glass flowers, and the preservation of modern and contemporary outdoor sculpture. She is currently the Director of Art Conservation for the City of Cambridge, where she uses prefabrication conservation reviews in her work with artists on new commissions. And next to her, we have Maggie Westling. And Maggie holds a BA in Art History and Studio Art from Columbia University and an MA in Art History and Advanced Certificate in Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works from New York University. Presently, Maggie is the Morse Fellow of Paper Conservation at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where she works on the conservation, treatment, and exhibition of works of art on paper and photographs. Maggie has a specific interest in photography and has completed research projects on facsimile printing techniques and news photography, platinum and palladium photography, and she's explored the applications of digital imaging software for the monitoring of daguerreotypes and other artworks. Over here we have Kate Smith. Kate Smith is Associate Paintings Conservator at the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies at the Harvard Art Museums. Kate received her BA in Art History from Smith College in 1994 and her Master's of Arts in Paintings Conservation from Buffalo State College in 2001. In 2008, she was Assistant Conservator at the Strauss Center, focusing on the conservation of the mural cycles at the Boston Public Library. Kate held assistant conservator positions at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum for Gianfranco Pocobene Studio and at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, before returning to the Harvard Art Museums in 2011, where she specializes in the technical examination of paintings. And then lastly, we have Christopher Sokolowski. He earned a BA in Studio Art from Bates College, an MA in Art History from the University of Massachusetts, and an MS in Art Conservation from the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation. He has worked in the paper conservation studios at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Musée du Louvre, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Studio TKM, and the Northeast Document Conservation Center. Since 2009, he has served at the Harvard Library as a paper conservator for special collections in the Wiseman Preservation Center. He also makes paintings and has given much thought to making them last. That's a good way to end that. So I've come up with a few questions that I thought were very broad that would apply to most everyone in the room. And each member of the panel has prepared different answers for these. So the first question is, can you share a specific case study of a piece of art that you have come across where a more educated knowledge of materials could have aided in its preservation, especially if this material is not an artistic and aesthetic choice? And we'll start with Rita.
Okay, thank you. Can you go to my first slide? Oh, yes. The case study that I chose for tonight does not have anything to do with the artist not reaching out to me. It has nothing to do with how I specified the work to be done. So it doesn't answer the question directly, but we'll get to the problem and find the answer. Can I have the next slide? This is a piece that is on the Yorkshire Road underpass in Cambridge. And I'm not going to tell you the artist's name, you may know, but I don't want anyone to think that he didn't do a good job, because he really did. What happened with the piece is that the artist made a trellis so that it draws you into the underpass. It's really fantastic. And then there are birds along the side of the concrete wall. Everybody in the neighborhood just adores it. So, a year after we put it up, there were teeny little cracks appearing in the paint, and I couldn't figure out why that was happening. So I just decided to watch it. And then next year, there was more paint. And then in the third year, this is what it looked like. The paint was just absolutely falling off. There was terrible rust of the mild steel underneath, and I was totally perplexed. So I went back and talked to the artist. I had gotten to know the fabricator, but only over the phone. And he had come very highly recommended, and I had sent him the type of paint that should be used, and he said, oh yeah, no problem. So I took a look at this, and as I looked at it in a little bit more depth, I took a piece and looked at it under the microscope, I realized that there was a paint layer that was missing. When you do this type of painting, there is a primer layer made out of zinc. There's another layer made out of epoxy, and then there's a top layer, that's an aliphatic polyurethane. So I called the fabricator. I said, you sure you used the right paint? So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I called him a few times, and he stopped answering the phone. So what I did is I took a paint sample and sent it out for analysis. And what we found is that the zinc layer that he was supposed to put on was not the right type. It was something he bought at like Home Depot. And he didn't bother putting the second coating on. And the reason he did that is that he hadn't realized how expensive the top coat of black paint was. It's $400 a gallon. So if you're an artist, how much paint costs. It can cost more. So we found out what happened. We decided in this case not to bother the art fabricator. We did tell him what happened, and I don't think he will ever do this again. And if you could go to the next slide. This is how the painting should be done. This is a studio with an electrostatic spray booth, really huge. And these are the birds with the epoxy-rich, epoxy coating on top before we made them black, painted them black. And Melissa, if you could go to the last one. And then we put it back up, and it's been fine ever since. So this is really the thing that I learned from the case study, is that even if I know a fabricator, or if I don't know the fabricator that well, I really need to double check. And I now do site visits and go down and just check in. And then the other thing I've learned is that I usually ask the artist if they're having any problems or challenges I can help them with. But now I know I need to do that with fabricators too. So this is all set now.
Thank you. Oh yeah, here.
Thank you. I have a historic example to share, and this is a project that I've been working on at the Museum of Fine Arts. This is a photograph by Edward Weston. It's very early. The museum has a very large collection of his work. There's almost 2,300 objects. This comes from the very beginning of his career, and it's a part of his career. It's not well known because it doesn't look like what we think Edward Weston photographs look like. They should be sharp focus. They should be very neutral. He was a bit of a pictorialist in his early years. But another major reason these works don't get seen very often in the museum is because of this band across the top of the print. It's a different color than the rest of the print. And this has perplexed the curators for a long time, so I got interested. I thought, okay, we can figure this out. It's important to understand what's going on because it affects our interpretation of the materials. So did that area change, or did the area around it change? Can we have the next slide? These are details just of the recto and the verso. On the back, this is exactly where Weston applied his glue to mount the photograph. So, did the glue bleach the print? Did the glue change something about the print? Did the glue protect the print? This has been the focus of 2 years of my research and my time. We're getting closer, and if we can go one more slide. Just to kind of reassure myself doing my historical research, I found this great letter in the archives at MoMA, and he says, "I regret that the glue that I used for mounting stained quite a few of my prints. If I remembered which of 2 brands it was, I would expose it." He does not go on to explain, oh yes, and I used X and Y brands of glue. That would have been too helpful. I don't get to speak to him. I wish I could speak through history. That would be fantastic. So oftentimes problems like this come across conservators' desks, and my role in the project has been to research. We've taken some samples of the glue. We've determined what the components are. I have a whole system of recreating his process to try to recreate the problem, and the ultimate goal is to determine, can we treat it? Can we make this look better so that this picture can be shown in the museum again? Unfortunately, in the case of these photographs, they're incredibly sensitive. It's a palladium photograph, so this is a process that was really popular around the turn of the 20th century. They're becoming popular again. It's sort of an at-home, you can do it yourself. The chemistry is pretty accessible. But they're incredibly sensitive. So the image material sits right on the surface of the paper. And generally, as paper and photograph conservators, we would turn to using aqueous treatment. So we would want to wash, we might want to light bleach to reduce an issue like this. And unfortunately, because the material is so sensitive, it's not looking very possible. Secondly, because the glue had such an effect, and my belief after my research is that the print changed around the glue, so that color in the middle was the initial color. It's gone too far at this point. So we can maybe bring it back a little bit with treatment, but really maybe if Weston had, kind of looked at what his glues were doing or thought about, hey, what is this glue anyway before I use it, a problem like that might have been preventable. So, thank you.
And on the left is a normal light, and on the right is an ultraviolet light. And ultraviolet light induces a luminescence in certain kinds of materials that can be characteristic of those materials. So varnishes, natural resin varnishes, often have a very distinct fluorescence, and that an oil paint will not have. And so what you'll see is 2 things. There's a fluorescent layer glowing here, and then this fluorescent layer up here. Both of those layers are varnish. So there's paint, and then there's varnish, and then there's paint, and then there's varnish into fresh paint, which you can sort of see swirls up. The pigment was fresh still and swirled up into the varnish layer. So the varnish can't be removed because the paint will come away with it. And Moreau, as he was working and reworking, varnishing to create saturation, and so that he could then reestablish the painting and then build on it. And he was doing all of this. It's the kind of thing where, again, you wish you could say, please don't do that. Because, the thing is that I can understand, and in the moment, he achieved the appearance that he needed, and the surface and the depth that he required to make to create his vision. But the issue now is that, 150 years later, the painting is so yellow that we can't see that anymore, and we also can't do anything about it. So we had to learn to live with this result. And unfortunately, what has happened historically is that paintings with this kind of a structure, there's many artists who work this way. Sometimes they did get cleaned and they were, destroyed or really compromised, or abraded or skinned or worn. And so you see a lot of damage that's occurred because people embark on a cleaning without doing this kind of analysis that would make them stop. So it's the kind of thing where, again, it's about thinking. I guess it's about making choices. It's not about there's a right thing to do or a wrong thing to do, but there's consequences always to material choices and to understand what those are. So we'd love to be able to clean this picture, but we just can't.
Hi, as a paper conservator, we usually have a basket full of case studies because our treatments are shorter than everybody else's. And indeed, I have one to spill before you. And they, this bushel full or basket full of case studies all have the same problem, and that's poor quality matting and framing. Few things I can think are harder on works of art on paper than bad matting, bad framing, and long-term display. This was something I grabbed off the web. It's a typical example. It's an etching by Francis Seymour Hayden, who is, if any of you have ever pencil signed a print that you made yourself, an impression, he was somebody who started that pencil signing tradition in the 1850s. And I never understand why his work is not more highly valued, but it's not very expensive. Beautiful etching, and it was laid down onto a secondary support, probably an album page, and then at some point that album page was gotten hold of by a framer who kind of spread some adhesive across the top and stuck a window mat down on top of it. And then it was on display in a frame for a long time. And you can see that the etching is sort of darker. Just outside the plate mark, there's a signature there too. So long-term exposure. And then someone at some point, I guess, tried to take it out of the mat assembly. And so they totally skinned the top margin. So lots of mechanical damage. The image area is darkened. And let's see, can we advance to the next slide? Yeah, okay, so that's where the skinning took place. So I'm showing this to you because historically, framers have been hard on works. They do all sorts of things that they're hoping no one finds out about until after they've passed on. There are really great framers out there too, but you kind of have to figure out which are which. Let's go to the next slide. So that's where the piece was cropped by the window mat. So there's some matte burn and darkening of the image. Can you keep going? Yeah, and then the blue, you can advance that. That's the whole print itself, and then it's laid down on a secondary page, which has helped to preserve the piece, believe it or not, because it gives it some reinforcement. And then if we flip this over, this is kind of funny. Framers do this all the time. They just kind of write on the work. This is an example of somebody writing on the secondary support, but they don't hesitate writing on the work. And I've even seen ballpoint pen write on, contemporary art framers notes. And if you advance it one more, what do they say? Can't go to be gilded. So I mean, there are instructions here, but they have no qualms. I think this happens less. This probably happens less these days, but it's hard to take care of a work of art on paper, and I think and display it at the same time. And so I was trying to think of a lesson I could communicate to this crowd, and I think the lesson is if you're somebody who makes works on paper, prints, drawings, and the like, collages, all sorts of things, and you envision it to be glass or framed, if you will, to try to maybe sort of supervise that activity so that you know that it's put together properly, and not leave it up to necessarily the collector or the purchaser of the piece. And I know that there are a lot of additional factors, usually costs, that come along with that, of course. But it is worth thinking about maintaining control about how your piece is mounted and framed.
Yeah, I forgot to include, but NEDCC actually has really good tutorials about how to mat your artwork. I had to do that for grad school, so. I don't know if you wanted to mention, was there something about that?
Oh yes, one last thing. There's something on the back of this secondary support that I will talk about later, and here was a good example. There's an inventory number or a call number or something on the back that always makes me stop and say, aha, this was something one time. This was considered important. It was in somebody's collection, and that's something I'm going to encourage you to think about, when we talk about another question. So there is one mark on the back that I do approve of very much.
Okay, so the next question is, many conservators are artists alongside being conservators. Can you share an experience of how your knowledge in art conservation has affected your methods for creating your own artwork? And then I think Maggie goes first.
Sure. I think I'm just going to make a prediction here that you're going to hear pretty much a conversation from Christopher and I about glue tonight and adhesives. That's going to be a theme. I make a lot of photo books, and as I was learning more about conservation and then going through conservation program trainings, glue became, a theme. What's out there, what works with the kinds of photographs that I'm making. Did I make a photograph on a fiber-based support versus some kind of plasticized support? Was it inkjet? And in my own practice, I think I started just coming back to the water-based adhesives when I can, because I knew they were going to hold up over time. They were more reversible. In conservation, we love to use wheat starch paste. It's our go-to adhesive. It's been around for thousands of years. We know how it behaves. It remains soluble over time versus other kinds of adhesives that are out there that sometimes we'll turn to in conservation for specific applications, like Lasco, for example. My feeling now is as long as I can use a water-based adhesive, I'll go that route. I'll use something that I know has been around. I've become very suspicious of products out there that are advertised, lasts for 200 years. Has it been around that long? Then no, we don't know that it lasts for that long. So yeah, I think it's particularly with glues, I thought I could mention. Christopher, I don't know if you have the same thing to say.
Yeah, choose your adhesives carefully.
Yeah, definitely.
So I make oil paintings on plywood, but before I show you an example of that, I'm being brave because this is an audience of artists. I want to show you two other artists, one known and one not. But as a professional conservator, I'm sort of well aware of, the concept of oxidation and entropy and how that comes to bear on works of art. And what I mean is, everything tends to brown. Everything becomes brittle and starts to fall apart over time. And so as an art maker, what I'm thinking about is how can I make something that resists that inevitable trajectory. And so I put up, before I show you my own piece, two pieces. The one you certainly recognize, which is very brazen, in its regard for aging. And then the other, which is a kind of, I guess it's an anonymous piece of folk art that I saw on First Dibs, which is kind of very sort of resistant to oxidation and entropy, in the sense that it can take darkening, it can take bruises, it can be scratched, and not significantly alter what it is. Whereas none of those things could happen to the Jeff Koons balloon dog without seriously compromising its aesthetic. And that leads me to another comment about contemporary art, and since we're all breathing, we're all contemporary kind of artists, is that I do feel like a lot of work gets made, and it's the image, it's the digital image of the work that's actually the best representative of that piece, and that the physical piece, whatever happens to it, but this image of the balloon dog will go on and sort of maintain the aesthetic. For my own work, so here's an oil painting on plywood, has red oak strip frame around it. So what I'm thinking about, how can I make this in the, sort of with the simplest system that won't be substantially compromised by darkening, yellowing, bumps and bruises. And so you can see that the aesthetic that I've chosen to embrace is much closer to that anonymous kind of folk dog sculpture, where I'm okay with the plywood darkening, and I'm okay with, I don't put varnish on these pieces, so I'm hoping that that might help, but I'm not sure. We'll see. But, and it can take bumps and bruises, and it's messy, and I just feel like it is, it's a conception that I'm hoping will weather the years better than something that's absolutely pristine and perhaps made out of, mirrored plastic that just can't take abuse or can't take dust. So that's something that I think about with my own work, is like, how does it look like, how will it look like when dust accumulates on it? Will it be substantially compromised? In this case, not. That's about it. And in making my own works, I read a lot about, what makes for a good oil painting. And I read that an oil paint film on a rigid support, something like wood, seems to work better, seems to be more robust than an oil paint film on a textile support. How much better? I don't know. It all comes down to preparation and application, the quality of the materials. But since I'm less experienced than probably most of you out there, I decided to just go with that suggestion. And so far so good. But it's something that I think about, and I'm not recommending that it's necessary to think about. But I guess I'm bothered by I'm bothered by how works get made that can't resist, can't endure just kind of life.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, what are some simple measures that an artist can make that can aid conservators in the future and ultimately with the preservation of our artwork? Let's start with Rita.
Okay. The most important thing you can do is write it all down. So when you give something to someone or you sell it, don't just say, oil painting on linen, but in some other place, write what type of paint you used, anything about the framing. And I love what Melissa did when she sells her dog paintings, to put all that information on the back with the recommendations. It was just, that's a fantastic fantastic thing to do. And that the other thing, when I work with contemporary artists right now, I also have them write a narrative about their work, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about the longevity of the work. It's just about what it's meant to be. And someone might say, you know, my work needs to be, you know, outdoors, or if it's indoors, it's meant to be about sun. Or this is a food painting. I'd love it if people hung it in their kitchen or their dining rooms. So anything you can think that you'd like to write down. So what I do with artists, I have them write a little narrative. It's sort of like, you know, the thing that you put on your website. But then after that, you talk about, do you really want it to last? And it's so funny that a lot of artists I work with, when I ask them, younger artists, when I ask them how long they expect something to last, they say 50 years, which is their, you know, their probable lifetime. It's also the life of concrete, so it's another interesting thing. So just write everything down. And even though, you know, you may not be famous now, it's really good to collect your stuff someplace and have a little archive. You can scan it, you can put it somewhere safe where you put your insurance information, but or at some other place, but it's really not, it's a very good idea to do that. I've worked with a couple of artists in the past couple of years as they have decided where to give their written materials to an archive. And it's a very interesting process to go through. And even if you can also write down things that didn't work, so you can remember. When I was in art school and was doing oil painting, we were all very excited about this product called Dorland Cream Wax. And it was like cold coconut oil. And we mixed oil paints with it, and it was just amazing, the impasto effect that you could get. And not long after college, I looked at my paintings, and all the places I had used it had turned yellow. So it's just a good thing to know. You know, if something that doesn't work, to also make a note of it. I think that's all I have to say.
I thought I would take this question as an opportunity to make a public service announcement about your digital materials, because I'm sure all of you are making digital images of your work or as your work. A couple of tips. I don't know how many of you have heard these things before. The archival standard is a 16-bit TIFF, not a RAW file from your camera, not a JPEG. The best file you can save is a 16-bit TIFF. Keep multiple backups of all of your work, so keep multiple backups in your house, keep one at a friend's house, somewhere else, out of state is even better. Don't treat a flash drive as a backup. They die. I've had that happen. It's really upsetting. Yep. Actually, you know, libraries and archives still make magnetic tape backups. That's still considered an archival material, so think about that. It's really easy to lose your digital materials. It's good to perform a regular check. Just go back into your archive, open up a couple files, make sure everything's okay. Careful when you're using file sharing services like Dropbox. They often alter your files in ways you might not see right away, but over years you'll see the bit erosion sometimes happening. So it's good to go back and check and keep those in multiple places as you can. I'm always reminding everybody in my office, save your files, save your files. They disappear really easily. We think of digital material as being so of the moment, right? It should be there for you. But think about things you were making 5 years ago. Can you open that file still? Probably not. And that, you know, goes along with the hand in hand with all of the software updates that we're forced into now by all of these companies. It's just kind of part of being the digital age. We have to stay on top of all of these different versions of things.
So, excuse me, painting specific, I can't say enough about backing boards, actually. I think that's the best thing you can possibly do. And not to call you out, but it's kind of a nice example. The backing boards, but with like a corner cut out so they can breathe, like a little gap. You don't need a gap, or they don't need to breathe. It's actually better to close the window entirely because it's about mitigating vibration. So it's about preventing dust, preventing puncture. But anytime a painting on canvas moves, it vibrates, and that is the primary source of all the cracking and everything else. So a nice tight backing board on the back where you can handily put any information you might want to provide about a painting is just the best thing you can do. But there's so many little things around framing and packing and storing and moving that can go a long way to preserving the body of an object. So with a painting, if it is a framed thing, to line the frame rabbet with felt tape to prevent abrasion, to use mending plates instead of brads or nails to attach it to a frame so that it's more easily removed from that frame. Not allowing any kind of wrapping material to touch the surface, particularly of a painting that's fresh, but really any paint surface. So any kind of plastic or bubble wrap or even glassine, which I really hate because glassine can crease into a really sharp corner and scratch like a knife. Just to create collars or some kind of system to keep all wrapping materials away from the surface of a painting will go a long way to preventing really tragic early damages to a film. And then just back to this idea about how something is constructed, so about choosing what you're going to layer in between layers of paint, or how soon you'll varnish if you varnish a surface. A fresh oil paint or even an acrylic paint surface is so receptive to a resin layer on the surface that if you can give yourself the time to allow things to really dry and use really safe, stable materials as a varnish, you'll just buy your painting that much more of a lifespan. Yeah, it's about the back of the house stuff, the back of the painting, and how it's stored and kept when it's not actually up on a wall somewhere.
I have some things I wanted to share. This is going to be the most important utterance of the evening, but presumably we all have our best works ahead of us, not yet made, working up to that. So you definitely have to think about your own health as you work with the sort of buffet of poisonous materials that artists' materials are. And the top two that I would share with you to be mindful of is adequate ventilation. Solvents are even the volatile solvents from a Sharpie are not good for you. And then, eating while art making is another sort of common activity that should be avoided. So think about those two things. In terms of getting artwork to go on and on its own, irrespective of your personal health, labels, as others have mentioned. Sign your work clearly in block letters on the back, even if you have a special signature that you use on the front, for example. It's incredible to me how much anonymous but good quality art is out there because it wasn't appropriately marked. Even things that you don't maybe think is your best work might turn out to be, as the years go by. So why not mark it? And when I say labels, I'll even be specific. Kind of make yourself a good, clear label somehow. If you've got good handwriting, great. You can make a computer-printed label on like rag stationery and glue it to the back of your piece using, Elmer's white glue. It doesn't have to come off. You don't want it to ever come off. So use a plastic glue that doesn't give up. Don't use a self-adhesive label or tape or anything like that because that's gonna fail eventually and dry out. Inventory numbers they're a mystery to me, but they're something that make people who kind of handle art, sell art, collect art, sit up a little straighter. So if your piece has some sort of number, that presumes that the artist has some sort of ledger and that it's a piece recorded in there. That's exciting. You can get a rubber stamp with your your name on it, your studio name, what have you. Stamp it on the back of your piece with one of the more permanent ink pads. That's a way to go. And then the last thing I'll say is, continually reevaluate your technique, your method, your choice of materials. Is there a way that you can get the effect that you want in a simpler manner, in a sort of more archival manner? And the way to kind of circle in on the best techniques is to read, I think, the latest literature on art making. Books like the artists' manuals out there are not all created equal. Basically, the older the manual, like Derner's is from 1911 or something like that, just into the 20th century. That's probably the weakest. And then as you move up towards our time, if you can find more, everything builds on the older material. And then you actually have, at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, people who would look into, the material constituents of art making products, rate them, test them, especially for light fastness. And so those are worth exploring, and I'm talking specifically about there was a resources sheet that Melissa kindly put together, which is a page of gold, frankly, and you should not lose it because it has a lot of information on it once you start to look around on those websites in particular. And I'm talking about the University of Delaware Mitra site, the Amiens site, which I think has stopped being augmented because the smart person behind it passed away, Mark Gotzigan. Just Paint is strong. That's the Golden sponsored site. They're very serious. Conservators have used their materials for decades now, and I think in general we're very happy. Just consult more recent literature, I guess, even though you may have a favorite hand-me-down artist's manual. And the one more thing that I'll say is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that often we look around in museums for, we assume that the works on display in museums were made well. But I think that's false, because you're looking at some people who actually keep some poorly made but interesting things going. So you can't always learn from the things that you see. You can learn from them, from their aesthetic effect. But in terms of their technology, it's not always, unless you go way back in time, where you can be certain things work well, especially in ceramics, stone carving and so forth. You can't always assume that, in particular, more modern and contemporary works, just because they're in a museum, that they were made well, and that their apparent technology is something to emulate. So that's where I'll stop.
Thank you. And I should mention, he mentioned the resource sheet at the end of the event. You should definitely go to the back of the room. Alexa and Maggie are sitting at the table, the coffee table, and there's a bunch of resources, including the resource sheet that he was mentioning that I put together. So the last question is, have you had any experience working directly with artists? What are the advantages of doing this? And do you have a particular pricing structure to do this type of work? We'll start with Rika.
Thank you. This is what I do every day, so I would like to talk about it. I work with public artists as they apply for a commission or after they have the commission, but before the art is even made. And so in the public art program in Cambridge, we feel like this is the most important thing we can do before an artwork is even made. So it is not done in one seating. It can take multiple visits. It can take multiple emails. It takes checking with fabricators. It's visits to a studio. but it's really important to get all this information down. So at the top, it's just all the basic information about the artist. I also make a note, because sometimes an artist will work with like a landscape designer or some other designer, and it's really important to get their name down there too, because they can have an effect on the art. Public art today is no longer the plot sculpture that would be in the center of a plaza. A lot of times now art is totally integrated into a building. It could be a railing, it could be a window, it could be an archway that's part of a building. So it's really important to just get the information of who is actually working with the artist. We also think a lot about the environment, and we write down as much information as we can. And it could be something as simple as, this is a mural going on this wall. It faces south. So if it faces south, colors could fade, and that would be a project to work really hard on making sure that the correct colors are used, as well as varnish layers or multiple varnish layers. When we start, we just do what the general materials are, so it could be something like painted panel. But then we make a list of every little bit of material that could go in there, and that's so in the future if something goes wrong, someone can come to this document and find it. Many times what we do is get a sample of the artwork. It might be a piece of fiberglass, it might be a brick. I've got a piece of cement in my studio right now, and what I do is test on it, and I do spray paint. I might do cooking oil if it's going to be near a pizza place and it's going to be outdoors. I usually do something waxy. The fabricator is an important part of the conversation, and they also need to be included. Mostly to make sure that they know what they're doing and where they're going to get their materials. Another really important part of outdoor art or indoor art is how it's installed. So we want to make sure that it's perfectly done. We don't want anything falling down or falling off or falling in. And then for things that are outdoors, we also want to talk about the lighting, because an artist may or may not want their artwork illuminated at night. And it's very interesting that sometimes something can be made, put in a plaza, and then the building or the lighting architects put up a spotlight on the artist. And then on the back page, this is the part where we interview artists. And you can get information on how to interview artists on the VOCA website. But what I do is just start to talk to them. I love it when they give me a narrative about the project, and then we go from there. And it's just a very interesting thing. If it's in an urban area and they're making a mural that you can see a river behind it, if I say, well, suppose that parking lot where we can see the river isn't there anymore, how do you feel about that? And the artist will add, if the view of the river is no longer there, my artwork is moot and I would like it taken down, which is fine to say. Then both of us talk down what has to happen. I just talk to them about it. And then we come up with an agreement. We talk a lot about longevity. I've already said a lot of young artists say they want their stuff to last for 50 years, but I encourage them to see if it could last longer. There are also instances where the art really shouldn't last any longer than a certain amount of time, and that's totally fine. And then finally, we do a maintenance plan that we do together with the artist. By going through a review like this, the artist learns a lot about their own work, and if they go on to another project, they'll know to include all this. The other important thing about this document is it has all the information on the artwork by the dump truck, and somebody comes to pick it up and it's like, well, I don't know what this stuff is. It's all right here, and so have everything available to us in Cambridge. Thank you.
That form is fantastic, and it reminds me there's a similar form that exists for photographers. It's called the Photograph Information Record, the PIR. It was developed at the Metropolitan Museum, and it's quickly becoming a standard. Can you hear me? Is that better? Sorry. The Photograph Information Record, developed at the Metropolitan Museum. It's becoming a standard for museums that collect photography, and it's quite similar to this form that Rika shared. It contains information, for example, what kind of printer did you use, which ink set, did you mount it with what, which have been translated into a number of languages, and museums are actually requiring artists to submit this form before payment goes out for art. So heads up on that one. But I think, this was a great question. My immediate response to it after Melissa shared it with us was, it's more beneficial for us to speak with you. It informs us about the materials that are out there, because we're not the ones using them every day, so we need to know from you. So the opportunities that you have to get in touch with us they're more beneficial for us, and we enjoy doing it. It's not our goal to say, no, you have to make art by these rules. That we just want to give you information, and if you find a material that is horrendous but it totally captures what you're trying to do, then that's on us. That's job security, really. So, that's why we're here. I had an opportunity over the summer to work with your work. It's going to change as it lives in the museum, as it gets exposed. And she was like, yeah, that's great. I'm okay with that. And so that was a choice, and she'd observed it, over time in her work. And that was for me to go, okay, so, this is the expectation, and we can try to document this. We can try to document the life of this work, and then that's on us, and that's on the museums, and that's on the collectors to decide, what moments in the history of an object that we keep track of. So, yeah, we love working with you guys, so please get in touch with us. That's my final message.
Thought process and the material. We like to geek out about materials. I think we're on sort of slightly different sides of the same coin. That we love this material stuff too, because we want to know how it works. And talking with artists about it, you can get it really nitty-gritty right away, and it's just a lot of fun. You can engage with it that way. I recently had a chance to do an artist interview with Barclay Hendricks, who had a picture hanging in one of our teaching galleries. And it's this beautiful thing. It's this enormous white field picture with an image of a woman 3 times in a white dress. So it's sort of a white on white field. And I was eager to talk to him about it because it had this really prominent cracked neckwork in the bottom right corner. It had clearly some kind of an impact from the back at some point in its life, and the crack had formed in its sort of spiral pattern that's really typical of that kind of damage. And the crack edges had raised up, and they really interrupted this otherwise perfectly even glossy field of white. And in talking to him about it, the cracks definitely disturb, those kinds of problems go away, but I wanted to get his sense of how it affected the picture. But the conversation got really interesting. We started talking about the relationships of the whites. The white of the dress had been painted in lead white oil paint, and the background had been painted in unbleached titanium acrylic. And he had chosen the unbleached titanium to give a warmth to the background white tone in a subtle but distinct separation from the cold white of the dress. The dress, as though he'd varnished them all with Damar. So as the painting aged, the dress, both the oil binder but also the varnish, yellowed and muted that white, and so that the dress and the background merged closer and closer together till they're almost a uniform color. And it was a change that he noticed. That is not what I meant to do, but I am so glad that happened. And so what was great about that conversation is that varnish could easily be removed. It was a change that had happened that I could have reversed, but I won't now, and I'm going to put that in the record because I want to maintain the fact that he saw the evolution in life of this picture as a positive. And unfortunately, the thing that really bothered him, I couldn't do anything about because it was sort of this inherent problem of the structure that really can't be addressed. So it was a fascinating conversation just because we need to leave room always for that possibility of evolution and change becoming valuable on its own, and not having a knee-jerk reaction to undo everything we can undo. I mean, the Moreau I was talking about earlier, I suspect that Moreau, given the way he was using color, probably would be dismayed to see the effect of his varnish now, but I'll never be able to ask him about it. So being able to talk to people while they're still with us and making and doing is the best.